This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks. Welcome to the show.
This is American Real TV,
There's so much to talk to you about.
where everyone
You are a true inspiration.
has
We're all trying to do our part to change the world.
a story.
What's your mission? What do you want your legacy to be? You have such a great story. I cannot wait to share it. Welcome to the American Real family. I cannot wait to air this episode.
And now, here's your host, Roger Brooks.
In our rapidly evolving digital marketplace, traditional negotiation approaches are becoming obsolete. Companies facing supply chain disruptions, remote work challenges, and global uncertainties need flexible, adaptive negotiation frameworks. The stakes couldn't be higher, with research showing that organizations with strong negotiation cultures outperform their competitors by up to 25% in securing favorable terms and building sustainable partnerships. Our guest today has developed a groundbreaking approach that transcends conventional negotiation wisdom. His continuum-based framework adapts to the evolving dynamics of business and interpersonal relationships across all sectors, whether you're negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal or navigating complex international relations. His new book, Evolve or Be Slaughtered: Negotiation for the 21st Century, builds upon foundations laid by negotiation pioneers like Chester Karras, William Ury, and Chris Voss, but introduces innovative concepts designed for today's complex landscape and beyond. I'd like to welcome internationally recognized strategist and author Derrick Chevalier. Derrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for that introduction. I was wondering, who's he talking about?
Well, you're so modest, and I so appreciate you joining us today. This is such a timely and important topic, really for anyone, whether you're an individual just happening to be listening to this, or someone in business who really needs to hopefully better understand some of the negotiating techniques and skills that you've helped so many people with across your career.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Roger. And one of the things I want to talk about and really, announce to the world is that really any human interaction is involved some part of negotiation. So the difference may be that a well-trained negotiator is aware of that, and somebody who doesn't recognize it doesn't even know that they're involved in a negotiation. And that brings up a couple of interesting uh, perspectives. One, the trained negotiator, especially the evolved negotiator, understands that we negotiate people, not circumstances or problems. So they're mostly focused on the individual. But the second thing is, and this is a big one, and that is that the trained negotiator, again, the evolved negotiator, understands the difference between demeanor as well as intent. So just because somebody's demeanor is very pleasant and personable, that is completely separate from the intent that they have in terms of their interactions with you or with your organization. And as you pointed out, in today's world where you have so much uncertainty, and even that the President of the United States is a recognized and certainly self-professed excellent negotiator, it probably is something that we want to pay attention to.
Right, right. And, this is just all over the news. And as I was preparing for our interview, I just, when something's on your mind, you pay more attention, right? So,
Sure.
I guess one of the things I've been hearing lately is you want to put forward something for the other side initially, right? What do they need? What do they want? Where are their goals versus looking internally or for your organization, starting out that way? Is there truth to that?
Well, you just outlined a fundamental difference between the snuff framework and every other framework of negotiation really that there is. almost every, and certainly the classic negotiation is that we go in with either a BATNA, which comes from the never split the, I'm sorry, that one comes from Getting to Yes, the Harvard system. So they talk about a BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So their suggestion is you're going to come up and decide what do we need, and if we don't get it, what's the best alternative? And then the negotiation really is focused on how closely we can get to that BATNA. And if we cannot actually get to something as good as or better than that BATNA, then the BATNA is a better choice. If you take somebody like Chester Karras, his idea is to aim high. You just go in with an accelerated idea of what you're asking for, and then negotiate from there. Well, in the snuff system, we look at both of those and say, well, the BATNA is really teaching you to negotiate against yourself. And aiming high doesn't make so much sense because who's deciding what and where high is? It's you. So again, you're negotiating against yourself. So as you pointed out, in the evolved system, we're less interested in what we know and in what we want and where we want to go. And we're more interested in discovering how far and how much is our counterpart willing to share with us of the information that we both know I haven't had access to. That's fundamental.
So where would you say the United States Trump lies with his style?
So, yes, I've written a lot about this for years before he was president, even the first time. I would describe the President Trump as a power negotiator, and
Hmm.
that's what I said years ago. Now, a power negotiator is a negotiator who is most successful when they're negotiating against someone when they have more power, more time, and more resources because that power negotiator is either themselves or they're going to hire representation that's extremely aggressive. Now, we know historically that is exactly who his chief negotiators and certainly his fathers and his biggest mentor, Leonard Cohen, or Cohen, was a very aggressive negotiator, right? And it's take no prisoners, make no excuse, and never admit a mistake. Now, what we see and what I predicted was that the power negotiator would not be nearly as successful when negotiating against someone who doesn't have the same time limitations, who has as much skill and perhaps even more, but whose framework is one of a long term versus the power negotiator who's focused on the short term. So if a power negotiator is dealing with someone who has a lot bigger viewpoint of timeline, they, you take the Chinese, they look at millennia. They look at 1,000 years. They look at 100 years at a lifetimes, whereas a power negotiator needs to get something done right
Yeah.
now. Well, that becomes a really a disadvantage. And especially if you're talking with someone who doesn't have to yield. In other words, you don't have more resources than they do. You can't bully them by saying, if you don't do X by Y date, then we're going to retaliate. Because what happens is the power negotiator then increases their demand or makes some kind of threat about a consequence or price that the other party is going to have to pay. And they set a deadline. Well, then that deadline comes, and what happens? The deadline is just adjusted because you don't have the resources and you're not willing to pull the trigger on the threats that you've made, which makes you look weaker. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what has happened.
And when you say that's happened, are you saying right now with the tariffs that's going on, or
Perfect example. When we had tariffs, if you don't pay XYZ, so take the power position. The Chinese already had a 10% tariff on them. Then President Trump said, well, it's going to go to 25%. Well, when they didn't respond, or rather they responded with an equal tariff, and in fact a higher tariff, then what we did was go higher and say, okay, well, now you got a 145% tariff. And then what happened? Said, well, we're ready to negotiate as soon as you agree to walk in the room. Well, what happened? She did not agree. He didn't even speak, didn't even respond. So now where are you? You're out with a bullhorn saying, you got to come out and talk to me. And by contrast, the other saying, no, we don't. Now, how does that make you appear on the world stage? Smaller. So you're getting weaker every day. And on a world stage, the power negotiator is at their biggest disadvantage because they don't have control of all of the players, and not all of the players are going to respond to a threat. We even see that the courts, even courts that are headed by judges that have been appointed, who are very conservative judges, are now saying, wait a second, you're now getting into the purview of the justice system. And if we allow that, we essentially erase ourselves. So they're not necessarily supporting a liberal viewpoint. They're supporting the integrity of the long-term Justice Department and rule of law because they know at some point somebody else is going to come in there and whatever they allow to happen will still be in place, and that may not be what they want to happen, and they will lose power.
Got it. So let's it's very fascinating how you broke that down, and thank you. It's very helpful for me, I'm sure, for our listeners as well. How would you compare your book to other books, such as Getting to Yes and Never Split the Difference, books like
Well,
that?
thanks for that question because one of the things we did, Roger, was to use the top selling books as a foundation upon which to build the snuff system. So I actually went back all the way to Sun Tzu, and I was really looking at all of the major players in negotiation and related areas in thought leadership, interpersonal communications, and saying, what things have existed since Sun Tzu up until today that are still resonating, still being used in the marketplace. So if you take a look at Getting to Yes, that book is a seminal book. It's a phenomenal book. But when it was originally written, the world was in a completely different place than it is today. So that's one. Number two, if you look at a book like Getting to Yes, because the authors are both lawyers and at the most prestigious university in the world, many would say Harvard,
Right.
they told a lot of stories about making a point. So here's a principle, and then here's a story about an interaction we had with a client that is an example of that principle. Well, now go back and look at where those companies and where those outcomes are. Many of the companies don't exist. Many of the things they said are irrelevant because there have been changes in technology. You didn't have the kinds of AI, the pandemic hadn't happened. The entire world landscape and communication systems are changed. So, not that the principles are rendered impotent, but they certainly need to be revised and elevated for the 21st century. And that is what one of the things that Evolve does. But I also want to talk about you take a book like Never Split the Difference. So, first of all, that title was borrowed or lifted, whatever you want to say, from Chester Karras, my mentor's work in his book, The Negotiating Game, which was written back in the 70s. It was one of the first contemporary books in
Hmm.
negotiation. So his third rule is don't split the difference. Now that's 50 years old, right? Don't split the difference. So almost 50 years old, he'd come back and say, well, uh, never split the difference. So again, you have an elevated never split. the difference. But the evolve framework comes back and says, wait a second, neither of these is a really good idea. And the reason they're not a good idea for most negotiators is this: if I teach you or never to do something, I have inadvertently taught you to fail in any situation where what I told you never to do is the one thing that would save your life or close the deal.
Hmm.
So, as opposed to saying to somebody, don't do something or never do something, Evolve says, well, let's figure out when to do it, how to do it, who to do it with, and then determine whether or not there are other options available to us that might be a derivative of splitting the difference. So if you step back and you say, well, where did that come from? Never split the difference. Well, Chris Voss is a 25-year a veteran of the FBI. He's a hostage negotiator. So if you're a hostage negotiator, it makes sense and it's true. You're never going to split the difference.
Right.
Why? Because ultimately there are only two outcomes in that scenario. The perpetrator is either going to jail or they're going to die. That's it.
Yeah.
So often ask CEOs and business folks and clients I'm talking to, I'll say, how many times in your life is the person you're negotiating with dead or in jail at the end of the negotiation? Well, people rarely, okay,
Right.
there was once somebody raised their hand.
Yeah.
It's rare. So my question would be then how does a career spent 25 years where 100% of your interactions, the other person was dead or in jail, how does that prepare them to help you negotiate in a small, medium, or large or global business? And the answer is, well, probably has some application, but it's certainly not an even leap from hostage negotiation to the kinds of contracts that your clients or that you or I or CEOs, CFOs of any size company are dealing with. So I would say that Evolve doesn't replace those books. It's an enhancement on those and other books that elevate them by applying some of the tenets and rules from Evolve. Then you're going to be stronger and smarter than you were without that resource.
So can you give us an idea of, I know this is your career, but when you put a book like this together, how are you able to take all that information and outline it and then actually get it into a book? Because there's years and years here of
Years and
information.
years.
Yeah.
Right. So, first of all, I have a pretty eclectic background. So, I studied to become a lawyer. And because of that, I also got a double major in theater arts and speech communication. So just before I was going to go to law school, I ended up falling in love and I moved to Washington. I mean, rural Washington. There, the closest law school was 110 miles away. There's no Zoom. There's no,
Right.
and so I ended up becoming an higher education administrator, and I ran a program that was a college preparatory program for disadvantaged kids from the Nooksack and other tribes, as well as we had kids that were migrant kids, we had Anglo kids that were lower income, and then we had black kids from 100 miles away from Tacoma. And the idea was these folks were not performing very well, and the system was saying they can't do it. So I got an opportunity to put this school together, an entire faculty, and just I'll tell you this: the dean of that school today is one of the former students of that.
Wow.
And there are doctors, there are PhDs that came out of that. So at that time, I did a lot of work about relationships and about teaching and learning tactics and strategies. For instance, I took Native American kids who had phenomenal understanding of nature, of skills, and of how to get things done. And I'd put them together with a 3.9 Anglo student who was totally college bound. And I'd give them a problem and I'd say, okay, fix this problem. What's the answer? Well, neither of them had all of the tools to get those to solve those problems. But together they created solutions, and out of that created relationship, and out of that came up with solutions that neither would have come up with on their own. So you flash forward, I did that, and then I returned to California, and I became a high-end audio and video salesperson, and I went into real estate and real estate brokering. And then finally, I was like, okay, I'm going to law school. And just then I saw an ad in the paper that said, facilitators for negotiation course. And it was an audition. So I go to this audition, no idea what it is, but I said, I think I'd like to do that. It's like 200 people in the room, and that was one of 3 days. So there were hundreds of people. So the Chet's second in charge, Movis, got up and said, well, we have 3 spots. And I said, well, actually, you have 2 spots, which which didn't go over so well. So I made the mountain higher. But long story long, I spent 15 years presenting Dr. Karras's program all over the country. And during that, I did multiple all over the country. But I took 17 hours of training that I got, and I wrote it all down in a notebook, and I memorized it like a script.
Wow.
Now, to your question of how does all that get in there? Well, that was the foundation. I could do that seminar today because I used my theater background to ingest it, right? So then at the end of 15 years, I thought, well, there are things that are not here that I can't do here. So I honored a 2-year non-compete. And it was during that period that I went and began to put what became the snuff system together. And that was the birth of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, so I guess that leads to my next question, which you kind of touched on a little bit. Outside of, say, transactional functions, how is negotiation critical to issues and relationships outside of that?
Sure. Such a great question. Well, I can tell you this. In the course of my career, I have actually done hostage negotiation,
Wow.
but we've also done a great deal of work in the automotive industry, for instance. So that's transactional by its nature. However, when we introduced the relationship and the focus on the individual that you're negotiating with, as opposed to the transaction, there have been unbelievable results. So, when I first created Snuff, of course, nobody would adopt it because it had no track record. So I went to the automotive industry where I had pretty good roots, and I cut a deal with one of the largest automotive manufacturers of parts. And I said, look, I won't give this to anybody else if you bring me on, but I'm going to do this program and it's going to be a full program. Well, I can tell you that over the course of a decade, they went from saving in the neighborhood of $7 or $8 million a year in their purchasing department to saving upwards of 25 to $35 million a year. And then what we did was I went to the local community college for people that were studying automotive, and I said, hey, if you've got folks that want to go here, have them apply for internships in this company. So I began working with people while they were still in college, and they were complete virgins in the sense of negotiation. Well, today, several of those people are directors and VPs of those very departments. And it had to do with the transformation of focusing on relationship, but also focusing on understanding what is it that the other person is not willing to share with you. Because it's only at that point that the negotiation actually begins. There's no point in negotiating all the things that they will share. Because if we're going to come up with a cooperative outcome, then what would happen is, Roger, there are things you wouldn't tell me and things I wouldn't show you. So I tell you what I'm willing to tell you. You tell me what you're willing to tell me, and we put that in a circle. And then I say, well, what else you got? So I might say, I'll put this into that circle. And the reason for that is to say, well, what does Roger put into the circle? Now, Roger may decide, wow, I now know something that I didn't know about Derrick. I'm going to use it to take advantage of him. Well, that's great because what I put in the circle was a test to see whether or not you would put something in the circle or whether or not you would take advantage of me. And you did.
Wow.
So I took some risk, but it was a limited risk. And so I know at that point, I'm actually in a competitive negotiation. So the strategy that I'm going to build might be a strategy that has nothing to do with the issues that we're talking about. It has to do with you haven't been promoted in 6 years. And this deal, if structured properly, could be a big part of that. Now, you don't like me, you don't like my deal, but you do like the promotion. So now I'm going to help you get that promotion in order and put you in a spotlight so you look like a hero. But we get not what we wanted, but what we had no idea was possible. And that's evolved negotiation. I'll say this, if the outcome of a negotiation is a reflection of what you thought it was going to be before you went into the negotiation, it's 100% for sure that the best deal was left on the table. Now, people call those win-win deals, and I often refer to win-win deals like this. People, well, win-win. I go, yeah, the reason it's a win-win is both parties are happy. Is I'm happy because I just beat you up, and you're happy because you think you won.
Right.
Great. There, so yeah, win-win, right? I win and you feel good about what you got. And if we're going to focus on feelings and I focus on facts and on behavior and on what's really driving or limiting the other side, then we're going to have a better outcome. Now, at the point that Roger, let's say, puts something bigger and says, Derrick, let's let all this go, put all our cards on the table and I put my cards on the table. Then both of us look at that, and you go all the way back to that upward bound station because now we have two people looking at a lot more data taking some risk. But at the end of it, we go, I had no idea that you thought this or wanted that or that this was important. Now that we do, we craft something that was impossible to do from the standpoint of a baton or aiming high or focusing on transaction.
Hmm. And I guess I would think that, like everything in life, the more you do this, the better you get. You make mistakes. You don't
Yeah.
make that same mistake again. But I guess what's one of the key principles from Evolve that everyone listening can benefit from?
Okay, I'll give you one. I would say um, rule one from our competitive rules. Okay, and that is ask Iowa questions.
Hmm.
Now, what is an Iowa question? If I ask you that, what's your answer?
No idea.
No idea. Now, watch this. Let me ask you a question. What's an open-ended question?
It's something that is left unanswered.
So it's unanswered, or it's a question that does not have a yes or no answer, correct? Everyone in your audience, if we ask them that question, what is an open-ended question? They would likely answer pretty closely to what you did. It's a question that doesn't have a yes or no. It's a question that we don't have an answer to. And that's what's taught in every negotiation course since Sun Tzu, I'm sure, and for open-ended question. But we teach ask Iowa questions, and we show a graphic of the state of Iowa because I want to put that in your head. And the Iowa questions would be a capital I W W W W H, Iowa. So it's
Hmm.
phonetic, right? Iowa questions, right? Now, what are those questions? Ask if, what, where, when, who, and how. Now, in less than 5 minutes, if I teach you ask Iowa questions, I have now not told you what an open-ended question is. I've given you an action that is the essence of what you actually want to achieve.
Hmm.
So that if you now walk in and you'll find, and all of your listeners will find it ain't that easy to do. Because if you're used to asking a yes or no question, from this day on, I just interrupted your pattern so that when you get ready to ask a yes or no question, you will stutter, you will stop, you will go, what? Wait a second. And then you'll think about it and reformulate that question. Now, what's the difference? It's the essence of everything we've talked about. If I said, Roger, you want $7 million according to your proposal. Well, I just ask you can say yes or you can say no. But a yes or no question gives away your power. Why? Because you just gave me permission to say no and shut you down. But if I said to you, so Roger, how old are you?
55.
Okay. So when were you born?
I was born in 1969, October 31st.
Okay. Now, see, we just went way past the competitive stage because you told me all of the elements to that question and all of them. You gave me the date, the time, how old you are. Now, 99% of the time, people will answer that question by saying, I was born in October, or, well, I was June.
Hey. Yep.
Right. Now, what do I know if somebody were to leave out one of those elements, the year, the date, the time, or the month? Now, if I would know two things. One, you know the answer, and two, you're not sharing it with me.
Yep.
But if I ask you, Roger's your birthday in February, you could say no. I learned nothing. I have no insight. So that rule is mind bending.
Hmm.
Ask Iowa questions. And if you change that behavior, what happens is people, you either find out that someone is willing to share it with you, or you find out that they are not. And either way, you know more that you didn't know, and that shapes where your strategy and the relationship. Because if you're not going to share, we're not going to work on the deal. My objective at that point is to create the lacking trust until that point that you're willing to share something, or until I'm convinced that I've used all the tools in my bag and you're never going to open. Well, now you've essentially declared war because we're now in a competitive because you choose not to share. And if I don't know something, but I do know that you're unwilling to share, then I know that my objective is to protect myself because your objective is to take advantage of any opening that you get.
Wow.
That would be the first thing.
That's great. No, that's awesome. So I have to ask, do these same principles apply to negotiations with our children, with our kids?
Woo-hoo. I love yeah, you. Let me just, you have kids, I have kids. In anybody in your audience with a 3 or 4 year old, when I see a family out and there's a 3 or 4 year old, especially if it's a little girl, I go, okay, I know who's in charge of that
That's
family.
right.
The toughest negotiators in the world are children. And why? Because in part, they are the opposite of an evolved negotiator. Why? They're only focused on what they want, when they want it, how. They don't care the rationale, the reason. They don't care what you think about the fact that they're going to ask 1,700 times, or that they asked you a moment ago, or that they ask you. And then you tell me, Roger, how do two children or three children, and if you have four, it's even better, get together without ever having a conversation and know who to send, who to go to, mom or dad, and what to say, and then how to revise it to come back at the opposite parent so that you then get them going at each other. And in the end, you go, well, we're not doing that, but we are doing this. And the kids are going, yeah, we know. Right?
Incredible. It's a
Right.
natural instinct.
A natural instinct. Now, what happens? By the time kids get to middle school, that pretty much disappears overnight because for the first time in their life, they're now only concerned with what other people think about them. And social media has put that on steroids. Now, all the way through adulthood, how many likes? What do they think? What are my friends doing? Where did they go? So they're less interested in their own opinion than they are of the opinion others have of them. So I would say that's the toughest negotiator in the world. But from the standpoint of an interpersonal relationships, I got a story for you. I've been in a very committed relationship for 15 years, right? And I met my partner on a social media. So I saw the picture of what I thought was this most beautiful person. She was on a sailboat and this smile. And I promise you, I looked at that picture and go, I have to know who the person is behind that smile. I have to know. So I go on social media, I write, and she comes back and she goes, not interested. Well, now it's a negotiation because now it's like, wait a second, I don't even know if I like you or not. But I wrote back something to the effect of, look, I can be entertaining for anybody for 30 minutes and I'm buying lunch. So come on. No, not doing it. So after about 10 or 12 spots, and we started emailing, and then the emails went from one or two lines to one or two pages. Then we started talking, and the conversations went from one or two minutes to 1 or 2 hours. And then finally we had lunch. And at the lunch, I look at her and she is just as beautiful. She's an MBA. She's smart. She's just, I was just enamored. So I have this great lunch. And at the end of it, I said, wow, this has been great. And she leaned back in the booth and she said, um, we don't really have anything in common. And I said, oh, well, yeah. I said, no, it wasn't my thought, but I said, okay. So we get up and we're walking out of the restaurant. We get outside. I walk her to her car. I open the car door for her, and I invite her into the car. She started to get in the car, and then I said, well, it was wonderful for me. And I walked away, and she grabbed my arm and turned me around and kissed me. And that was 15 years ago.
Wow. That's
So
awesome.
apparently we had something in common.
That's awesome.
Now, all along that time, the negotiation with her kids, who are both divorced, she has two kids, I have. Those kids are brothers and sisters today. And what about the in-laws? And if we have time, I'm going to tell you one quick story. So it also happened that she is involved in a celebrity family, right? Which I have no idea of this, none. So on one night I go, listen, I don't want to meet your family. I just want to date you. So she said, what? And I said, yeah, I just want to date you. And we'll keep the kids out of it. She said, oh, okay. So she called me. She goes, I have a book signing tonight, and would you like to go with me? I said, sure. So I show up at her house. The first person that walked out was her ex-husband. The next two people were her two kids. The next two people were like, we go to that, and everyone that she knew was at that. So the idea of we're not going to involve people was disappeared. And then I went to dinner with her brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we're at the table. They go, of course, to the restroom, powder our noses. And he sits back, and the first question he says is, how many clients do you have? And that person was Rob Reiner.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
I'm sitting and I'm starstruck. He has no idea that because I'm kind of playing it cool. But that was the very first he leans back, and that in itself was surreal.
Sure.
But I would say to you that none of that would have happened. And today, Martine is an excellent negotiator. She knows this stuff pretty good. The kids use it, our kids use it. So for interpersonal relationships, especially in solving uh, um, difficult challenges, negotiating and using the content is a absolutely important part of resolving difficult issues from the standpoint of not who wins, but the idea of nobody wins if we both don't.
Yeah.
That.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, great. Well, tell us about your no cost, no obligation consultation that you have.
Well, thank you for asking. That is absolutely ironclad for real, right? And so, why doesn't it say free? Because it's not free. Because if you take a half hour of your time and you've made an investment, so it's no cost other than your time, right? And my time. So I would invite any one of your listeners, you go on, there's a booking portal there. If you've got a question, whether it's a business question or a personal question, and especially if you have the book and you have something about the book, but there's no requirement to do that, the best way for me to demonstrate the power of evolved negotiation is to help you resolve an issue or to provide some action steps. Here's the issue. This is where we are. I will have some questions for you. I might then talk about a couple of principles that the foundation of the action steps. And then at the very least, I might provide a couple of actual action steps for you to go do. Now, when you go and do those, I have a high confidence that for a lot of people, they're going to go, "Wow, that worked. What else you got?" And the relationship starts from there. And even then, the idea is not to get as quickly as I can to charge somebody. It is to find out whether or not we're a good match and whether or not I can provide a level of service is not going to meet your outcome, but exceed your expectation. So it's simple to do. Jump on the website and do it. You don't have to buy the book, although we want you to.
And speaking of that, what is the best way for people to purchase your book?
Sure, the book is a #1 bestseller now. Thank you, Roger.
Absolutely.
And I love that. I love that. A #1 best-selling book on Amazon, and we're doing pretty good there. And so all you've got to do is go to Amazon and put in the title, Evolve or Be Slaughtered, Negotiation for the 25th Century. I mean, 21st century. We're not quite there yet.
And we'll be sure to put the link here in the show notes as well.
Great. Great.
Derrick Chevalier, thank you so much. Welcome to the American Real family. Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing your story with us today and giving us so much insight into negotiation. We
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much. You're not getting rid of me, by the way. You're stuck with me for the rest of my life because you're so young. But
Yeah.
anyway, I love your staff. The people, your people are, that's the magic. You're great. They're phenomenal. And wow, was that I couldn't, and I've never said that about any company or anything, but the quality and the depth of the expertise is in the sincerity and the care. You're not finding that anywhere else. And he didn't pay me to say that. So
No.
that's my story, Roger.
Thank you so much. I cannot wait to air this episode.
Thank you. My privilege.
Thank you for tuning in to American Real. For more stories like this one, be sure to stop by AmericanReal.tv. Follow us on all social media to stay up to date with everything American Real. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and contact one of our publishing experts if you're ready to publish your book and become a best-selling author.